Hey guys, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and if you're a light tank lover, well, I've got some really bad news for you, and that is Wargaming have significantly nerfed the Tier 10 Light tanks that I started to showcase on the channel a week ago. If you've watched the previews, you'll know that I was super excited about the T100 LT, and I was really impressed with the way that Wargaming had presented the Tier 10 Light tanks, and I thought they were completely balanced compared to their Tier 10 medium counterparts. But unfortunately, it looks like Wargaming felt that light tanks were performing too strong on the test server, and so have subjected them to what they are calling balance tweaks. But let's be very honest, this is just downright nerfs, which are pretty much crippling to what was looking like was going to be one of the most exciting bits of new content to hit World of Tanks in years. Wargaming argue that the initial balance settings improved their view range by too much, blurring the lines between light and medium vehicles. Hold on a minute. Aren't light tanks meant to be the scouts of World of Tanks? And surely the scouts of World of Tanks are meant to have the highest base view range. They continue by saying they had large enough view range to scout efficiently by default, so you could install additional equipment, train skills and perks to increase their firepower to the point where they could compete with medium vehicles. So if you're wondering what that mouthful meant, basically Wargaming is suggesting that when you make the view range above 400 meters base, that things like Brothers in Arms, Recon, the situational awareness skill which will be on your radio operator, allowed the light tanks to get very high view ranges up to about 470 without forcing them to use coated optics, and therefore dropping the coated optics and using vents, which would make, I guess, the combat capacity of the vehicle about 2.5% better overall. And apparently due to this, along with being great scouts, the Tier 10 light tanks would deal almost as much damage as some medium tanks. But just hold on one second, that is complete and utter tripe. What you're looking at here is the unnerved statistics of the T100 LT versus the T62A, for example. How in hell's name is a Tier 10 light tank going to come even close with competing with a Tier 10 medium tank with such a disparity as this? You're packing over 600 more DPM, 34mm of penetration on your standard rounds, and about 100mm on your premium rounds. And when you combine this with the shell velocity and the fact that the amount of ammunition you can carry in your Tier 10 light tanks is rather limited, which leads me to argue that this sentence is complete and utter nonsense. And whoever wrote this is frankly bending the truth to try and justify an unnecessary nerf. The result is that apparently they have averaged out the firepower to draw a thicker line between these two classes in terms of their combat roles. Light tanks will keep their trademark mobility, high camo values, and lower durability. Sorry, is that a trademark of a light tank? Okay. Just as they still outperform medium vehicles at scouting. And Wargaming have suggested that by lowering the view range of the Tier 10 light tanks, now you will be forced to use coated optics and binocular telescopes to improve it. But the irony is that Tier 10 medium tanks can do this already in the game. This is in patch 9.17.1. You're looking at the live server here. Let's take a look at, for example, the Leopard's view range. It's 410 meters. With my crew loadout, and I'm not even using coated optics, I'm using vents, I've still got 472 meters view range. Let's look as well at my M48A1 pattern. No coated optics here, 486 meters view range because this vehicle has 420 meters base. Other vehicles such as the Tier 10 British medium tank, the Centurion Action 10, it's a similar story. No coated optics here, but 472 meters view range. In fact, there are currently Tier 9 medium tanks like the M46 pattern that I do not have an excessively skilled crew in. I'm even missing Brothers in Arms and Recon off my commander, and I can get to 450 meters view range without using coated optics. And it just seems absolutely baffling that Wargaming would try and reduce the damage potential of the Tier 10 light tanks by reducing their view range to force you from using things like vents, which aid the combat capacity of the tank. And instead of this, they could have very easily just further reduced the rate of fire of these tanks, either the penetration, the accuracy more, maybe some of the gun handling, but nevertheless, they seem to have just handled this in a really backwards way. So now I'm going to compare all of the Tier 10 light tanks to their Tier 10 medium counterparts, and what you're going to be seeing here is the nerfed version of the Tier 10 light tanks. Firstly, the AMX 13105 compared to the Tier 10 French medium tank, the Bat-Chatillon 25T. The AMX-13-105 has less DPM, 300 to be exact, less penetration, over 30 on its standard ammunition, and when it comes down to the premium rounds of this vehicle, we're talking about 280 compared to 330, so 50 millimeters of pen on the premium rounds. The 13-105 also has the smaller clip potential, which can be useful, but certainly not useful when you think about the fact that the Bat-Chat has got 15% more DPM, meaning that for an extra 13 seconds reload, you can increase your magazine size by 66%. Furthermore, the 13-105 has a pathetic amount of ammunition that it can carry as well, 24 rounds, meaning that this tank is really going to struggle with its ammunition, especially when it ricochets. No one wants to have 234 millimeters of penetration at tier 10. Now, while the 13-105 certainly has better aim time and it has better gun handling, remember that these tanks have got an intra-clip reload time of 2.73 seconds, which means that it doesn't really matter how much you improve the aim time of this vehicle because you're still limited between the shots anyway. Also, the accuracy is worse on the light tank as well, 0.42 compared to 0.38. One thing the light tank does have going for it, however, is 8 degrees of gun depression, and I'm very surprised about this. I think that might be one of the things that Wargaming might change next. So how about the mobility? Surely this is where the light tank is absolutely going to destroy the medium tank. Well, it's not really the case. The light tank goes faster forwards by 3 kilometers an hour, but the Bat-Chat goes faster backwards. And take a look at the ground resistances. They're the same for both of these vehicles, and the power to weight ratio is not all that much higher. It's just 30%, and anyone who drives a Bat-Chat around will know that this thing gets up to pretty much its top speed limit fairly quickly indeed. And furthermore, the Bat-Chatillon's traverse speeds are not all that much worse than the light tanks. We're talking about less than 5% better across all terrains. And when it comes down to the armor, well, the Bat-Chat is the clear winner here. It won't be getting overmatched by 120mm caliber shells when it hits down the side of the vehicle, something that the 13-105 will have to deal with. And also, of course, you have those extra 400 hit points with the Bat-Chat, and this is where it just gets really silly, right? The Bat-Chat has 400 meters view range, whereas the brand new Tier 10 French light tank will have 390. Do you know what? There are Tier 3 premium tank destroyers such as the FCM 36 Pack 40 that have 400 meters view range. It's just absolutely baffling. What is going on? Wargaming have been thinking so creatively about ways that they can force you to lower the combat capacity of this tank that they're even digging into the view range to make sure that you can't use vents and you have to use coated optics. Now, of course, there is one aspect that surely the 13-105 is going to be massively better than the Bat-Chat at, would be the camo rating, right? Well, let's take a look at the differences between the AMX 1390. I've nearly got a full concealment crew here. I've got a full concealment crew on the Bat-Chatillon. When they're stationary, they've pretty much got the same camouflage rating because Wargaming base their camouflage values so much on a vehicle's height. And it's only when you're moving that the AMX 1390 has the better camo rating by about 9%. And sure, that's going to be useful, but it's not even close for making up all of the other aspects of the tank that the Bat-Chatillon 25T is going to be just the superior vehicle. And do you know what? If I was playing competitively in a tier 10 situation and I had a decision to either take an AMX 13-105 or a Bat-Chatillon in my team, I would have the Bat-Chatillon every single time. And so this will probably be a big disappointment to some tier 10 Clan Wars players who were really hoping for some kind of new injection of fresh blood into the game. Next, let's take a look at the Object 140 compared to the T100 LT in its nerfed state. Look at the DPM disparity. This is more like tier 7 or tier 8 medium tank DPM. A huge penetration advantage for the Object 140, an alpha damage advantage, and oh wait, I just forgot. I didn't take into account that the 13-105's magazine has been reduced to 360, meaning that this thing can only do 1080 damage if it penetrates an entire magazine at tier 10. And that's a really big difference to the 1170 it would have been able to achieve previously. The 140 also has vastly better shell velocity and carries a tremendous amount more ammunition. And this is what really annoys me about what Wargaming have done with the tier 10 light tanks. By lowering the amount of ammunition they can carry, they're going to force you to load more premium rounds in your vehicle. Because when your ammunition is so precious that even if you penetrate every single one of your shells, your maximum potential damage is less than 10,000, then why would you fire the standard ammunition and risk a bounce when maybe the premium ammunition is going to give you the little bit extra you need to actually damage the enemy? Next up, let's take a look at the gun handling. So the 140 has slightly worse aim time, and it does have worse gun handling here. But look at the accuracy. It is 0.11 better. .46 is terrible. That should be using a 152mm derp gun, let alone a 100mm Soviet gun. And the 140 also has that extra degree of gun depression. Now let's take a look at the mobility, and this is where the T100 does do exceptionally well. It goes at 72 compared to 55, goes faster backwards. Its power to weight is massively better than the 140, but look at the ground resistances. The 140's ground resistances destroy the T100 LT, which mean that it actually gets better traverse speed on medium terrain and nearly the same on hard, and it's only when you get onto the soft terrain, which is usually sand, that the T100 LT will have the better mobility. Next, let's look at the armor. The T100 LT has had its armor nerfed. It's now only got 90mm on the front, 40 on the side, 40 at the rear, 180 on the front of the turret, 40 at the side, and 40 at the rear. And the Object 140 undoubtedly destroys this, and again it's got 400 extra hit points, and it's now got better view range. Why has this got 390 meters view range? It's just baffling. Oh wait, sorry, I forgot this is to force light tank drivers to not use vents because it's impossible to be able to get a high view range on a medium tank that doesn't use coated optics, right? Sure, there's no doubt that the camera rating will be an advantage. If you've watched my T100 LT video, you'll know that it's got 42% camera rating when stationary and moving. But when we look at my Object 430, this has 38% camera rating when stationary, only 4% worse. And it has 29.5% camera rating when moving, so 12.5% worse. That's really not a big deal. And to have to sacrifice pretty much everything else about your vehicle, it's just absolutely crazy. Now let's take a look at the German Tier 10, the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen. Well, it's had its DPM significantly reduced because it's now only got 360 alpha damage. The Leopard 1 slays it with regards to firepower. It also has a lot better gun handling, as we can see here. Way better accuracy, better turret traverse. The only advantage is it has 1 extra degree of gun depression with regards to the Tier 10 light tank. Now let's take a look at the mobility. The Leopard is 10 kilometers an hour slower. Not that bad. It has the same ground resistances, which actually means that its effective traverse speeds are exactly the same across all terrains. And unless you're wanting to drive very quickly up a slope, really the Leopard 1 is just as fast as the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen. Now on to the armor. Well, the Leopard is significantly better and is not going to get overmatched across the entirety of the front of the vehicle or the turret. And it also has 350 extra hit points, and it's got only 10 meters view range less. Really, why would you play a Rheinmetall Panzerwagen when you could just play a Leopard? Maybe it'll be down to the camo rating, but remember, when you've got the Leopard fully tricked out, it's still packing 30% camouflage and 23% when moving, which isn't really all that much worse than the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen. Now on to the WZ1321, the Chinese vehicle. Again, way worse DPM, worse penetration, but not all that much. The WZ1321 really specializes with regards to that gun. The alpha damage is also less, and the shell velocity is actually better, which is interesting because the 121 does get that armor piercing shell. The aim time is also better, the accuracy however worse, but the turret traverse is better, and it's actually got better dispersion, and it's also substantially quicker than the 121. Its armor, of course, can't compete with the 121, neither does its hit points, and it has exactly the same view range. In fact, the WZ1321 might be one of the more balanced vehicles compared to the 121, but I just still could not be willing to give up this DPM disparity. Now onto the American Sheridan. Let's see how it stacks up to the M48A1 pattern. Again, it gets trashed with regards to DPM, penetration. Its alpha damage has now been nerfed to 360. Unless, of course, you want to use the big fat 152mm shell, but we couldn't really compare between the two vehicles like that. Its shell velocity is worse, its aim time is a little bit better, but look at the dispersion values. It's neither here nor there. The M48 is better when moving, the Sheridan is better when sitting completely still, but of course the M48 has the accuracy advantage. It does lack a little bit of the depression, and there's no doubt that the Sheridan is significantly faster, but it just has no armor at all whatsoever, and the M48 pattern is actually quite well armored frontally, and I always think that I'm going to be able to pull off a ricochet maybe like a third of the time or 50% of the time, especially against lower tiered vehicles. And let's not forget that the pattern has that big old slug of hit points more, and it's also got the same view range. So I was sitting here thinking, why has Wargaming decided to make the DPM of all of these tier 10 light tanks just unbelievably bad? They're pretty much the same as a tier 7 or a tier 8 medium tank. And when I went to go and investigate, let's take a look to see how the step progression of DPMs are for medium tanks, for example. Here's the STA-1, a tier 8 Japanese medium tank, and it has less than 2000 DPM. Then when you go up to the Type 61, the tier 9, it goes up by about 20% to 2340, and we see a similar step when you reach tier 10 for the STB-1. all going up by about 20%. And it's a similar kind of story when we look at the Pershing. 1,756 becomes 2,600, which becomes over 2,800. And this is not unusual for heavy tanks as well. The Carnarvon Tier 8 British heavy tank, 1,769, steps up to 2,285, and then the FV215B at 2,758. It's a similar story for the Soviets, although not quite as pronounced. It's going up about 10% each time, and again for the American heavies, a similar story. So why is it that a Tier 8 light tank has higher DPM than a Tier 8 medium tank, but by the time it reaches Tier 9 and reaches Tier 10, it's just fallen off completely? And it's not just the WZ-132 leading up to the WZ-1321, it's also a similar story for the Germans. Oh, and by the way, everybody who loves the RU-251 Speerpanzer, you'll be quite disappointed to know that it doesn't have that incredible rate of fire on the next test server to be able to justify the Tier 10 light tanks having such bad damage potential. They've had to nerf all of the Tier 8 light tanks as they step up to Tier 9 with regards to their combat capacity. And the step up is just not significant. And look at the guns, there's no growth. There's no growth anywhere. Why would you want to be jumping up from Tier 8 all the way up to Tier 10 with regards to light tanks? Surely it's something that wargaming should encourage, and being 2 tiers higher should mean that you are 2 tiers better, and that's just something that we're simply not seeing. When Anton, Thane, Milos, and Artyom all announced the Tier 10 light tanks on the stage at Wargaming Fest at the end of last year, I was so unbelievably hyped. And I thought they'd absolutely nailed it with how the light tanks were on the sandbox test server and for the first iteration of the 9.18 test server. They looked like they were going to be really interesting tanks to play, the best scouts in the game, but with combat capacities that were not even close to the medium tanks. And with these nerfs, frankly, Wargaming have just completely screwed it up. I, for one, will certainly not be excited to play Tier 10 light tanks when they come to the 9.18 test server. I'm not even really going to bother to grind my Tier 9s to try and get to Tier 10 as quickly as I can, because frankly, they're just not interesting, they're redundant, and you'd have to be crazy to rather play a Tier 10 light tank in these states to a Tier 10 medium tank. I don't think I've ever been so uninterested about an upcoming patch of World of Tanks. 9.18 has gone from being a good and a bad patch to just frankly being a real lackluster one. And I implore any developer who watches this video to please reconsider these changes. You're frankly changing what was looking like one of the most interesting aspects to World of Tanks that I've seen in a long time into something that's completely redundant before it's even got out the gate. And consider this an open invitation for discourse with any wargaming employee out there about my opinions and what I've said about the Tier 10 light tanks in this video. Either way, I hope all of you out there, you lovely individuals from the World of Tanks community, have enjoyed this video for whatever reason. And I'm also very interested to hear all of your opinions out there. Let me know in the comments, do you think that I've completely missed the plot? Do you think that these changes were necessary? Do you think they indeed make the new Tier 10 light tanks toothless compared to a medium tank? And are you a player like me who was really looking forward to investing time and effort to get to the Tier 10 light tanks, who really just couldn't be bothered now? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.